GETTYThe outcome that has been widely hailed as a triumph for democracy and freedom. It is an outcome that has been widely hailed as a triumph for democracy and freedom, heralding a new era of progress in Ireland. This is what liberation feels like, proclaimed the feminist writer Susan Mackay, who added that the vote represented a huge victory for humanity, for compassion, for empathy. That feeling has been just as prevalent within most of the media and progressive opinion in Britain. At times, during saturation coverage of the result by the BBC, it looked as if some presenters had to restrain themselves from dancing a jig. GETTY voters in Ireland have been praised for their wisdom and desire for change. Yet all this jubilation is in contrast to the response that greeted another referendum held recently in the British Isles. 2 years ago, when the public here backed Brexit, the same liberal elite reacted with outrage and despair. There was no celebration from the progressives, only gloom. Today, voters in Ireland are showered with praise for their wisdom in embracing change. The irony is that the biggest peddlers of fear during the EU referendum campaign were the Remainers, with their dire talk of economic meltdown and British isolation. Leo McKinstry. Yet ever since the EU referendum, Brexit voters have been remorselessly denigrated for wanting change. Far from being congratulated for their enlightened courage, they are demonized by the pro-EU lobby as gullible, knuckle-dragging idiots duped by anti-Brussels propaganda. Typical of this attitude was an outburst in March 2017 from the scientist Richard Dawkins, who described Brexit voters as fickle, misled, ill-informed, and ignorant, and the same intellectual superiority was exhibited by veteran Labour MP Barry Shearman, who grandly declared that, when you look at who voted to remain, most of them were the better educated people in our country. Sometimes the snobbery is explicit. "The Chevs have won, mate," said one middle-class raver at the Glastonbury Festival when the Brexit result was announced. Brimming with fury, Remain campaigners have consistently attacked not just Brexit voters but also the entire concept of referendums. Such votes, they wail, promote mob rule and bitter divisions, which undermine the subtleties of parliamentary rule. One left-wing newspaper called referendums a demagogue's dream, allowing populists free rein to fan fears, distort realities and appeal to emotions. The irony is that the biggest peddlers of fear during the EU referendum campaign were the Remainers, with their dire talk of economic meltdown and British isolation. Some pro-EU activists even draw a tortured historical connection between referendums and Nazism because Hitler occasionally used plebiscites during his subjugation of Eastern Europe. Such an insinuation just illustrates the poverty of anti-Brexit thinking, for totalitarian rule is the very opposite of direct democracy. It is telling that ideologues who sneer at referendums are inclined to worship the EU, itself an unelected, unaccountable institution. GETTY. Richard Dawkins described Brexit voters as fickle, misled, ill-informed and ignorant. Even worse is the spectacular hypocrisy of the progressives. Having spent 2 years since Brexit bemoaning the iniquities of referendums, they suddenly see the virtues of such votes after the Irish decision. In their view, populism is bad if it leads to EU withdrawal in Britain, good if it legalizes abortion in Ireland. To them, democracy is acceptable only when it produces the right result. Otherwise, any unwanted verdict should be ignored or overturned. The liberal orthodoxy must prevail, whatever the public wants. Ireland has direct experience of this. Today, there is no question of the establishment trying to reverse the abortion vote, but it was a different story in the previous decade, when the Irish people twice voted against the EU in referendums on the Nice Treaty in 2001 and the Lisbon Treaty in 2008. Appalled at this popular dance of the pro-Brussels line, the Irish government simply refused to accept the results and, in both cases, ordered the public to vote again. GETTYThe Brexit referendum should be respected as much as the Irish one. Tragically, this is what is now happening in Britain. The progressive elite, while extolling the will of the Irish people on abortion, refuses to accept the will of the British people on Brexit. That is why we have seen endless court challenges, new versions of Project Fear, wrecking amendments in the House of Lords, and demands for a second referendum. It is also why the government and officialdom have been so useless about implementing Brexit. They do not really believe in the process of withdrawal, so they cling desperately to the EU, offering ever more concessions, ever bigger payments, ever longer transition periods, ever more complex customs arrangements. Again, the contrast with the outcome of the Irish referendum is remarkable. Yesterday, the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar announced that repeal of the abortion ban would be swiftly enacted, with the first legal terminations to take place by the end of the year. Yet in Britain, 2 years after the EU vote, paralysis and inertia prevail. There is even talk that Theresa May, increasingly the queen of prevarication, wants to extend our membership of the EU customs union to 2023. It was revealed yesterday that the Electoral Commission has been paid £829,000 to make contingency preparations for the 2019 parliamentary elections, which occur after Brexit. The implication is that Britain might be staying in the EU far longer than the public thought. The Brexit referendum should be respected as much as the Irish one. GETTYThe is that Theresa May wants to extend our membership of the EU customs union to 2023. In their different ways, both votes were about autonomy. Their results were inspired by the belief of voters in their sovereign right to choose and take back control. An establishment coup against British democracy would be intolerable.